Welcome, everyone, to Alliance for a Viable Future podcast. I'm your host, Lev Natan. Today, I have the privilege of being with Dr. Stephanie Mines. She's the author of 5 books that reflect over 3 decades of research as a neuroscientist. She has investigated shock and trauma as a survivor, a professional, a clinical researcher, and healthcare provider. Her nonprofit, the Tara Approach, is instrumental in the systemic change she promotes as a sustainable health paradigm. Dr. Mines also developed climate change and consciousness to facilitate inner transformation for grounded climate action. Climate change and consciousness serves an international and intergenerational community of visionary activists. Dr. Mines' latest book, Memoir of an Embryologist, How I Discovered the Secret of Resilience, will be released in 2022 from Inner Traditions Sacred Planet Books. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you, Lev.
So I want to just say a few words as a personal introduction, which I like to do because the conversation that we're cultivating here has a lot to do with relationships, and that change flows through relationships at the speed of trust. And so when I share the way that we have been connected, then we share that with our listeners. I think that field of trust and connection grows, that people can hear, oh wow, these people know each other, and they're actually learning to work together and partner and understand how to take on this work together. So on that note, first I want to say congratulations for just completing the manuscript for your book yesterday. It's very auspicious. Here we just were sharing about the new moon and St. Bridget's Day, and it's the Chinese New Year here on February 1st, 2022. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And we just met a few months ago through climate change and consciousness, a mutual friend and colleague, Ben Roberts, who does the What Now gathering or conference twice a year. And I was personally very struck by your reaching out to me and being interested in me and the work that I'm doing, and in a very personal way, that there was a certain quality to it that had an impact on me. It struck me as not the way that I always feel that people are engaging me, from that personal relationship building kind of way. And then of course exploring, hey, how can we work together on top of that, but really beginning with, hey, I want to know about you, I want to get to know each other, and so I really appreciated that, and I feel that it's an important way for us people who care about the future of our planet and the crisis that we're in, that we practice that way of being more and more. So I appreciate you as a leader, leading by example in a relationship building way. That's how I experienced you. So I want to also say thank you on that note.
That's stunning what you're saying, Lev, because it is core, really, to how I orient. And it is really the essence of everything that I do, is a passion, really, a consuming passion to have personal unfolding be the way we move through the crisis times that we are born for right now. And so it's something I have at times been criticized for, because it's time consuming and not very efficient to focus on individuals and relationships. But it's in my blood. I can't not do it. So I appreciate you for speaking to that.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Amen. It's important to presence it here in this space of our Alliance podcast, because this is a place that we're cultivating a particular kind of conversation. You know, how do we go about being in alliance for a viable future? And so that's the way that we're practicing also here. So it's important to put language to it the best that we can. So thank you. And so then moving right into that being a bridge to your, professional work, even more so, I would think. I don't have a lot of personal relationships with neuroscience scientists, but I would think that that's much more of a left brain technical kind of culture of work, and that's not as relational. And so in that sense, also you're kind of acting as a groundbreaking, bushwhacking trailblazer to be working in that way. And this question then of how has your work as a trauma specialist, with the science background that you have, prepared you to address the mental and physical health consequences of the climate crisis?
That question is the question for me in my life right now. So my work as a neuroscientist has a unique trajectory. There are many different branches of neuroscience, of course. My emphasis has evolved considerably in the course of my career, but has really come to be very focused on neurodevelopment from the standpoint of embryology. That, therefore, the title of my newest book, the one that will be released soon, either this year or the beginning of next year, Memoir of an Embryologist, How I Discovered the Secret of Resilience. So more and more, as I worked as a trauma specialist with individuals and with groups, I came through my research to understand the nature of neurodevelopment in utero and the magnificence of the human design for resilience, innovation, buoyancy, courage, and responding to threat. So within, of course, the more dominant, thankfully, trauma-informed awareness that we have now, right in these times that didn't exist when I started my work, but that thankfully has come to the forefront, the importance of being trauma-informed, there is focus on how fight, flight, freeze, those aspects of the nervous system respond to overwhelming experience. But what I feel has been neglected in that conversation is the awareness of, and I would say the scientific evidence of, the brilliance of embryonic unfolding that is fueled in a highly individualized way. And there we go back really to where we started, that each individual is unique, and that statement feels insufficient to describe what I actually mean by it. It's not just praising idiosyncratic differences between people. The human design from a neurodevelopmental neuroscience standpoint is unique to each individual. And within each individual, and highlighted at this time, there is a remarkable brilliance, a remarkable, astounding capacity to meet threat with innovation and with an alignment for life, for compassion, for future generations. That inspiration is what fuels us physiologically as we meet the daunting crucible of prenatal life and birth. And the focus in meeting those challenges, I want to return, my book is devoted to this, return the focus of meeting those challenges to the embryo, to the being, to the embryonic intelligence that lives within us and that is alive right now, no matter your age.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, as you were speaking about this before we started the recording, and then now you're continuing, I can't help feel in my body, wow, I really needed to hear you speak right now. I'm feeling encouraged at this moment by your words personally and in my family. You know, I don't need to go into the whole story, but I just feel like, oh, whatever the story is, you're bringing me the news that basically I have what I need to meet the challenges in my own life and to support my family to do the same, and my community, and so on and so forth. So so I just really appreciate it's helpful for me to hear that. I'll just say it very as a plainly for myself. And then I think even more so because of your science background and the way that to hear you say that the living being, the embryo, is wired for courage and other qualities. That's something that I don't hear all the time. So I'm really grateful to hear it. And in a sense, it feels obvious to me, the connection that you have made of trauma to the climate crisis. It's like when I see you, it's like, oh, of course, that's what she's dedicating her life to. But maybe I wouldn't have unless you were standing and doing it. And certainly others haven't made that quote obvious choice that you have made. And you know, you're truly acting, you know, as a pioneer in many ways. So the fact that the climate crisis is here, right? It's not going away. So, you know, you are bringing this information to your communities and the work that you do to individuals and families about how to be prepared from this worldview that is deeply scientific. So I'm wondering if you can share, you know, what can we do, or what not only what can we do, but what can you illuminate for us that we're already doing or we're already able to do, if we just, you know, just hearing it would affirm, you know, that we're doing a good job.
Wonderful. Once again, Lev, I feel like you really get me and you really hear what I'm saying and you really get to the core of it, to the very nub of my intention. And I'm very grateful for that. What I am saying, and I've said this in my previous books, I say it even more in my forthcoming book, but I am also saying it in my communities and in the other communities that I support. Those of us, and we are many, who have come to this code red time that we're all collectively inhabiting, who have a background in awareness of having met traumatic and shocking circumstances. And I think that's many, if not all of us, are the best first responders in this time. So this underscores an ongoing message that I deliver and that others deliver. I'm not the only one. I point specifically to Rebecca Solnit, who speaks of this in Paradise Built in Hell and many other books, is that at the groundswell level, at the level of bottom up, we have a wisdom within us that unfortunately we have been manipulated into suppressing, but that hasn't destroyed it. It hasn't gone away. It hasn't died. The innate resilience, wisdom, intelligence, I call it original brilliance, I call it embryonic intelligence, that is indestructible. It cannot be destroyed. The cultural dominant theme of authoritative, star-driven, other-directed following denies what is the truth, which is that we're all meant to be leaders. Every single one of us is meant to be a leader in a unique way, and that is feasible and, in fact, highly productive when everybody is a leader. And nobody is a follower. Everybody is a leader, but all those leaders collaborate. So that capacity to reconnect with the leadership in each one of us that was the will to bring our embodiment forward is right there. It's available for us, and it can be available for us very quickly. We do need, some of the unlayering strategies that brilliant people have brought forward. I bring them forward myself. But in actuality, through consciousness and through a kind of laser-like awareness that is kindled by these times, we can get to that innovative awakening of agency, selfhood, leadership quite quickly. And it is kindled as it was prenatally and perinatally in the birthing process. It is kindled by crisis. So that is how I want to invest my time and my energy as an elder.
Wow. Beautiful. Yeah, again, it's really, there's a different pressure point, in a sense, that for you to make that connection between our capacity to lead or to step into our full potential or into our contribution or gift, that is unique, but that it comes from the fact that we're all here. We all came into this world, we had them, as far as I know, everyone that's here had a mother, and was in the womb, and went through some kind of a birthing process. And that is what you're saying gives us the capacity to show up right now. And this next question of, like, are there any health benefits to the climate crisis? If there are, what might they be? I just want to bring in the cultural overlay of rites of passage and initiation. that is ancestrally, our nature-based societies. I think, however they understood to develop the very sophisticated technologies of rites of passage and initiation, they, in a sense, are all modeled on the one that you're talking about, being an embryo and coming into this world. That's the first rite of passage that we make. It's a passage, into this world. So I just wanted to presence that, and then what you're within. Then there's a parallel there. What you're saying, the dominant cultural overlay of you're not the authority. You have to listen to the expert, and they'll tell you what to do. There's a parallel there with our tragic loss of rites of passage and initiation, in whatever we want to call this modern, culture, the dominant paradigm that we live in. So just wanted to say those things as a invitation for you to make some connections around. Here we are in the climate crisis, so we can either, we have to be here and we get to be here. So I guess the question is, how can we make it we get to be here right now?
Exactly. Oh, beautiful. And let me go back again. I like having a thematic thread, and the thematic thread that you initiated this conversation with is one that I want to return to, which is the personal connection, the relationship that led to this podcast. And, when I first heard you, Lev, on a program in which you were doing a ceremony to launch the program, what struck me and what urged me to stay in contact with you to pursue our relationship was that in the earth-based connecting ceremony that you were leading, that you had been initiated into, you were clearly sending me a message of unification. So there was the sense that I could fully participate in this ceremony as who I was, with my particular background, regardless of whether or not I was a member of that culture that had initiated you. So there was an inclusivity, a welcoming in, and a restoration of the innate indigeneity that lives in each one of us. And that is precisely what I am pointing to through embryonic reclamation of that component of our history. So as part of this cultural overlay that divides people into us and them, and divides people into authorities, people who really know, and the rest of us, we have been robbed of our earliest history. And that's a long story that I am not even interested in repeating, but it is a story that basically takes the experience that is everyone's experience of embryonic development and just slices it off of everybody's biography, kind of like circumcision. It just cuts off the intelligence that lives in our connective tissue and forces it underground. So what I am doing in my work is unearthing that, regenerating that. And I love actually the metaphor that I've myself just put forward, the one of going underground into the mycorrhizal, tiny organism layer of our being and reconnecting, just as these earth-based cultures never lost that kinship with the earth, with deep down in the earth. I am inviting that for each individual. that is actually the direction for meeting the climate crisis and the pandemic, which I consider to be an extension of climate crisis. I don't separate those two crises, pandemic, climate crisis. They're one. They're from the same causative circumstances. So the answers are deep down in each individual, and the unearthing, the regeneration of those resources that each one of us had, and then our collaboration, then our coming together. And that's what I felt you embodied when I first met you, and you were conducting a beautiful ritual of the meeting the directions, all the directions, introducing people to new directions they hadn't thought of that are within themselves. The way that you did it, Lev, and I'm speaking very comprehensively, your tone of voice, your line of vision, your gestures, all those are characteristics of embryonic brilliance. Those qualities in you magnetized people into their own indigeneity. And, it was a small group that attended that, but I think virtually every single person in that group was struck by their experience of that ritual. And I really had the feeling that the ritual was coming through you. It wasn't about you, Lev, but you were the vehicle, and you were an essential vehicle of that delivery of inclusivity and empowerment at a very deep, humble, and empowered level. And it's really my witnessing of that, and the way that merged with my own wisdom stream, that led me to say, I want to know more about this person. I want to reach out to this person. I want to connect. I want to collaborate with this person. I want my communities to have this experience.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's a beautiful thing to feel, the affirmation of, my expression and my path through the lens of your life's work. You're developing something within yourself, and you're creating language and many other tools of practices to support people to get it, what you're pointing at. And then it's very humbling to say, oh, well, you were seeing that what you're pointing at, you were seeing it in how I was expressing. So I really appreciate that. And I think there's something in terms of just segueing right into the secret of resilience. If you could say a few words, which is what the subtitle of your book is, there's something about the secret of resilience in this embryonic intelligence.
Thank you. This is such a current, every moment question. What is the secret of resilience? Those of us who are highly attuned to the global threshold that we're standing on, that is represented in climate crisis, in the pandemic as an aspect of climate crisis, the threats that are quite palpable and escalating to democracy globally, within our own country here in the US, but not only in the US. The sense, I have it all the time, of living in a decaying fabric, just watching the meltdown of integrity everywhere. And the insistent forces that distract us from that meltdown, that from my standpoint as a mother and a grandmother, are incredibly harmful for our babies, for our children, and for future generations. We are not being given the tools to prepare for this escalation of the meltdown that is happening before our very eyes. We are being encouraged to ignore it and be distracted from it by cheap toys. So I'm attuned to that. I'm sensitive to that. It hurts me. How do I bounce back from it? That's the secret of resilience. And I bounce back from it by restoring, by regenerating my embryonic intelligence. And I do that in a variety of ways. I have specific energy medicine that I teach as one route. I don't consider it the only route, but for me, it is an important route because as a trauma survivor, as someone who experienced overwhelming shock beyond just the threats that are associated with early life, there were the life-threatening circumstances of living in a violent and highly dysfunctional family situation that I am not the only one to have managed to make it through such poor beginnings. I am certainly not the only one. There are many of us. But because of that experience that was ongoing and that was primal, it was my prenatal life, it was my primal period, it lasted throughout my crucial developmental years, my nervous system did suffer. You know, my nervous system got broken, got shredded, got hacked in a variety of ways that had personal impacts. And so I have to reconstruct my nervous system regularly. And I have, by an incredible grace, received the tools to do that. But if you add to that the way in which our current situation triggers those early traumas, you know, then you have the responsibility. I have the responsibility, and I meet this responsibility every day. I will say that transparently. Every day, I rebuild my nervous system because what's going on in the world is so painful to me. I can't ignore it. I don't want to ignore it. I don't want to be distracted from it. But at the same time, I want to meet it, and I want to meet it authentically. I want to meet it with truth. And that truth is that the indestructible embryonic intelligence that is my birthright is greater than that manipulative, decaying, distracting force that attempts to disempower me. It hasn't succeeded yet, and it's never going to succeed because I will rebuild my nervous system every time it calls for that.
Amen. Yeah. It is so, and so it is. Yeah, and I'm thinking of one of my mentors who he's like a Yoda kind of person in my life. He's the man that was the founder of my graduate program in organizational leadership. His name was Mel Toomey, and he just recently passed on into the next world. You know, he lived a really long life. But let's see, what was I? Yikes. I dropped the thread. Oh, yes. he talked about, these domains of activity. When you look into the past, it's something that I know in the past from past experience, right? It's like, well, it was like this, so it's just, that's the way it is. I can rely on it. I know. And so there's certain things that are good about that, and then there's other things that we can get stuck in a rut, and that's a whole tangent we can get into, both personally and organizationally, in our communities, in our nation, so on and so forth. And then he invited us into, okay, so then there's future, the domain of the future. In the domain of the future, the way that we speak into the future is I declare. That's future talk. I declare that this is so. That's what I hear you saying.
That's beautiful. I honor Mel Toomey. That is beautiful. And yes, I hadn't conceptualized it that way, but that's exactly right. I honor my ancestors. I honor even those people who were abusive to me out of their own suffering, but I declare a different future. And I look at what is happening in our world now. And of course, I'm in the US, so I'm very conscious of our political dilemmas and the fact that we are not actualizing the embryonic intelligence. Our leaders are not actualizing their compassion nor their embryonic intelligence. They are mired in the past, I would say, and thereby abandoning the future. Because our children, I'm very, very pained by how our children are suffering under these circumstances right now. And I know this is true everywhere, but I'm, as a grandmother, I am completely aware of how my grandchildren and everyone's children are not getting the educational resources they need, are not getting the rites of passage that they need, are not being given the birthright of hope in the future that they deserve as a result of the failures of leadership. And that is why my focus really is on the leadership that rises up. And I declare, I love that. Thank you, Mel Toomey. I declare that I will be a force for that uprising of leadership. One of the areas that I focused in as a neuroscientist and as a researcher was serving families with neurodiverse children. That's been a particular area of clinical research and great curiosity for me. So I worked with families with autistic, severely autistic children, and that led me to working with the families of veterans, because the children of veterans have a higher incidence of autism and neurodiversity than the general population. That was a breakthrough discovery for me and led to 2 of my books. But what I gained from that research personally was I witnessed families, very often the mothers, but mothers and fathers, not only advocating for their children, but understanding their children and providing resources for their children in ways that the healthcare professionals did not see. So this feeds my underlying premise of embryonic intelligence, of a groundswell of what I call regenerative healthcare providers. That's a paradigm that I'm putting forth, that we can create regenerative healthcare conditions at the community level. one inspiration for that are these families, where I would see situations where young people with many diagnoses of neurodiversity, of sensory dysfunction, the parents, because the resources available at the authoritative professional level were so inadequate and sometimes destructive, I would see families come up with ways to bring forth the hidden intelligence of their children that the medical profession didn't value and didn't even consider. So I want to just side note here that I don't intend to diss and be negative towards healthcare professionals. I am a healthcare professional. Many healthcare professionals are so deeply compassionate and so creative and devoted to their service. So I am not in any way wanting to cast a shadow over an entire profession. But by and large, when it comes to things like, and this was a big part of my research, was the individual child rather than the diagnosis, the individual child, just as you referenced. I focused on you as an individual. I got your individual brilliance was shining its light on me. So each child has that capacity. So even if the child can't speak, the individual brilliance of that child is still accessible and can be amplified. And there is lots of research that shows that now. But it was that experience of seeing that intelligence, that healthcare intelligence at a family level, that continues to give me faith that my paradigm of regenerative health is viable. Because people criticize it. They say it's too idealistic. They say, you know, it's not practical, you know, and it's true. I don't think about my paradigm as a money-making venture. I think of my paradigm as protection and care for children and the delivery of compassionate but viable, researched, effective healthcare at the groundswell level.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie, for those words again. There's kind of like two ways that I could take this conversation, and I'm gonna choose to be a little bit vulnerable here and just be real and to say that actually, uh, you know, you're telling my own family's story. Actually, my son is 2, a little 2.5. He'll be 2.5, and he's certainly, I guess, I'm learning the language. He's diverse. He has what's the language you said?
Neurodiverse.
He has, yeah, he's definitely neurodiverse and has had a developmental journey that's not within the normal, you would say, timeline. You know, he's walking, he's growing. So it's been quite a journey for my wife and I. And I do want to give, I appreciate how you said, you know, usually it's the mothers, and it's true, you know, my wife is in a lot of ways leading the charge, and then I also am showing up for the journey as well, I'd like to say. And the way that you're saying the families are the experts in one way or another. I heard you say that, not in those words, but you said they found a way for their child to walk forward into the future. You know, it's encouraging. So now I go back to the beginning of this conversation and saying, oh, I really needed to have this conversation. So this is a whole nother layer of truth and reality to that statement that I made without even knowing what I was saying. So I appreciate that, and look forward to future conversations in public and not, in terms of you know feeling you as an ally genuinely with your background. So and I know, or I don't know, I have a sense, that there are other families, other parents, or friends of parents and so on and so forth, who are listening right now. And, you know, we haven't even gotten into the specifics, but I think that the respect and honoring of parents who are, taking hold of their own faith and active faith, and the creativity that comes from that. I hear you speaking to that, and it encourages me, and I imagine those who are listening as well.
I'm so glad actually that we have come to this, because it's a subject that I don't feel I get an opportunity to talk to these days very much. This aspect of my expertise has gotten kind of put in a corner as I have been organizing climate change and consciousness, and trying to support global communities in regenerative action. But this is so dear to my heart. And one of my concerns is for neurodiverse children living in an accelerating climate crisis environment. As our environmental conditions accelerate and deteriorate in ways that are already present in other countries, but that are soon to be present more and more in the US and more privileged areas, such as the ones we inhabit. Who is looking out for those neurodiverse children? Who is creating protections for them, for the mental, physical overload that those little ones whose sensory filters are more exposed, who is looking out for them? And that is really a strong motivation for me in creating regenerative healthcare training programs, which are I've been working at this for over 5 years now, and just starting to get some headway in being able to create some actual training programs. I'm speaking now with Humanity Rising and Ubiquity University about launching some programs there. Just really the very beginning, but I have been aiming in this direction for 5 to 10 years. And here is, I think, an important link that just popped into my awareness that takes us full circle here in this conversation, which is, even though what I've described here as a very important aspect of my legacy, which is the regenerative healthcare paradigm and the training of regenerative healthcare practitioners who would have the skills you're looking for right now in regard to your son, that are completely accessible to you, that the resources that you need to be obviously the parent your son chose to meet him where he is right now, they're in you already. It's not so much a matter of you going out somewhere and getting something you don't already have. It's more being encouraged to look within and heighten the resources that you already have. So this comes out of my clinical research. It comes out of my experience with families. It comes out of, clinical trials that I conducted that were peer reviewed and published and all of that acceptable stuff. But the truth of the matter is, and I remembered this just recently, and it's in my forthcoming book, this story. The truth of it is that when I was a little girl, like I'm talking under 4 years old. And I was living in this horrific environment, which was the product of the Holocaust, which was the product of trauma that the people around me had experienced that was, delivered to the children, with me as a particular object of transference just because of being a girl. At night, I would have a little fantasy story that was all internalized and that involved me and my pillows. And that fantasy story, which was such a healthy, beautiful fantasy, was of being in the center of a healing circle. So in my fantasy, I saw these beings that came out of my pillows with the brilliance of children, and these beings were healers. And I was surrounded by these healers. And they were showing me how I could deal with this situation, how I could deal with this violence, how I could deal with this hysteria, how I could deal with this threat being delivered by people who were obviously so distraught. The little child in me could see that. These people are so distraught. They are so unhappy. And that unhappiness was enacted in violence towards me. How was I going to survive this? How was I going to stay alive under these circumstances? And my pillows that became these healing beings showed me how, by their existence. Now, who is to say that I wasn't actually being visited by healing beings of another dimension? But I was smart enough to not share this fantasy with other people who would probably have named me insane. But in fact, that became my fantasy of health. My imagined realization of the healthy route to resilience that now has taken form in my paradigm of regenerative health. And I just made that connection recently while writing this book, that this brilliant little girl, this precious being who lives in me, had the wisdom to create a paradigm of resilience and keep herself sane and even of service to her family. That's the brilliance I want to evoke and support and nourish in every individual.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, that's another amen. There's a number of 3 or 4 more questions on here, and I'm just kind of looking at them and feeling like the arc of our conversation is like the song is coming to a close in a just sensing that, and I'm just seeing the word human evolution in one of the questions, and the benefit of coming generations and new systems. So I'm wondering if you want to kind of tie the bundle here and bring those words together, that intensely personal and individual experience that we are each having right now. I have my version of the archetypal journey of crisis. Like, it's real when I get stressed, and there's too much on my plate. And it's also real when that too much, that overwhelm changes and I find the path myself personally. And that process, I can rely on it, actually, that there's something archetypal, there's some patterning as a human that I can take from my own journey And I've begun to rely on it so much that I feel called to support others to begin to rely on that certain kind of leadership patterning that why we're talking. And so for me, there's the pathway of human evolution individually, and then layering that systemically, culturally, community, that there's a patterning that we're pointing to both in this conversation and in our respective work. So I'm wondering if you wanted to just I think you know what I'm getting at for yourself, and I'd love to hear you express it. And
Yeah, I speak to this with a scientific basis, with an understanding of embryonic neurodevelopment. I can say with certainty that we are right now in a process of the evolution of consciousness. And the challenges, the threats, the pressures that are being put on us are designed for the evolution of our consciousness so that we transcend these circumstances. And we do that for your son. We do that for future generations. And the focus that we need is what will deliver us. That's another major theme that I was writing about in my book, is meeting the manipulative, destructive, extractive forces of distraction that manipulate us by robbing us of our focus and our intention is one of our highest objectives. We need to harness the power of focus and have clarity that we are engaged in the evolution of consciousness as the most important orientation to meet the crises before us now, and so that humanity can survive, so that the children of the future have a world they can thrive in. And we, as the adults, have the responsibility of doing that through our focus and through the evolution of our consciousness. And just knowing for certain that every single threat, from the challenge of what you're facing with your son, to finances, to relational difficulties, all of those threats are kindling for the evolution of consciousness.
Well, thank you again, Stephanie. I think that's a beautiful place to close this particular conversation, and a good, healthy jumping off point for future conversations.
I'd love that.